A major twist in the mystery death of a New York fashion designer on a Hamptons yacht.
Female unconscious, not breathing at the Montauk Yacht Club. 32 Star Island Road.
The family of Martha Nolan O'Slattera just filed court records that accuse the man she was last seen with of assault. What we know about him and the allegations that claim he might have thought he was having a romantic encounter with the swimsuit designer who is roughly 30 years younger than he is. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Martha Nolan O'Slattera died on August 5th, 2025. And 1 year later, we still don't know her cause of death. We do know that she was aboard a boat at a swanky yacht club in Montauk on Long Island, and that boat was owned by a 60-year-old man who was also an investor in her fashion company. This is a court summons that is providing a major twist in this mystery. We just got it out of New York, and it is addressed to that yacht owner, a man named Christopher Durnan. He was with Martha at the time of her death. Now, the document's notifying him that Martha's family is going to sue him for wrongful death, and it alleges that Martha's death may not have been an accident. The document accuses Durnan of assault, among a couple other things, which we'll talk about. The Suffolk County Medical Examiner's autopsy reportedly found no evidence of obvious trauma when they did an autopsy on Martha Nolan, but an independent autopsy that was ordered by Martha Nolan's family reportedly found trace amounts of cocaine in her system. The Daily Mail was the first to report that. The family has said that it wasn't an amount of cocaine that would lead to an overdose. Now, there's a couple other clues coming out of that independent autopsy that we need to talk about and how it could factor into not just the wrongful death lawsuit, but figuring out exactly what happened on this boat. Nolan's family wants $50 million. Now, before we get to that part of the story, I need to remind you how we got here. So O'Slattera went by Martha Nolan publicly. She was just 33 years old, and she had moved to New York from Ireland in 2015. And she really worked hard in a new country and became a rising star in the ultra-competitive New York fashion scene. And it also appears from social media that she was living a high-flying lifestyle of luxury, but as an entrepreneur, she was working hard for it. She was the founder of a clothing line called East by East. They made swimwear.
Hi guys, this is Martha from East by East. I am the founder, the creative director.
Nolan reportedly started the brand in 2022. New York Magazine wrote a big expose about this case in November of last year, where there were several new pieces of information that were put out into the public. And the magazine article reported that Martha wanted to make East by East a global brand. And she started out small, though, with pop-up shops in the Hamptons, and she was really working her way into the really wealthy crowds of the Hamptons in the summertime. New York Magazine reported that to help give her business a boost, she sold 13% of it to a wealthy man named Christopher Durnan. He is a 60-year-old widower, and the article says that his wife reportedly took her own life in 2018. Now, Durnan sold his insurance company. That is how the magazine says he made his money, and he really became a fixture of a Hamptons summer. He owned multiple boats that were docked at the yacht club where Martha Nolan died. Durnan was allegedly with Nolan when she died. Durnan reportedly invested $250,000 in East by East, which is a good amount of money, but this brand, especially if you wanted to make it a global brand, they needed more money. And on the night Nolan died, she and Durnan allegedly went out for an evening cruise on his yacht. New York Magazine reports that Durnan and Nolan sipped champagne. They watched the sunset before they returned to the yacht club. Members of Nolan's family told the Daily Mail that it appears that Durnan may have thought that this was not a business meeting, but a romantic encounter on the boat. The 60-year-old, they note, stocked the boat with bottles of Dom Perignon champagne, which is the good stuff, that can go between $200 and $300, if not more, for a bottle. Now, Nolan reportedly was in a relationship with a man her age, and she was actually texting with him the night that she died. But the lawyer for Durnan, and to be clear, Christopher Durnan has not been charged in connection to this crime, said that his client and Nolan were more than friends. Remember, she's 33, he's 60 years old. Just pointing that out. Now, this is another odd part of the story. According to New York Magazine, shortly after Nolan died, Durnan's attorney said, quote, "They actually dated. He had told me after it happened that he loved her and that he had met her family." He claimed that Durnan had visited Nolan's family in Ireland. Now, Nolan's family said that's not true. as we're trying to piece together what happened, the relationship between Nolan and Christopher Durnan, it is incredibly important to this story. Nolan's family pushed back on the idea that the two of them were anything more than business partners. And Durnan's lawyer, according to that article, did walk back some of those comments saying, quote, he goes, we weren't boyfriend and girlfriend. Now, the attorney reportedly wouldn't say anything more about whether Durnan and Nolan had been physically intimate, saying that it wouldn't be fair to her memory to share those pieces of information. So Nolan and Durnan are supposed to be on this business meeting, on this yacht. They're sipping champagne, watching the sunset. And reportedly, this is what happens next. Durnan's lawyer told New York Magazine that Nolan and his client, they're on this boat called Ripple. And he says the two of them talk business and they apparently had been on the water for a decent amount of time. Then at 9:20, a friend makes a joke in a text message to Nolan on a group chat that says, LMAO, I'm sure her phone died, or maybe she's dead. Obviously, at that point, it was just a joke. Nolan responded to that text at 9:30 saying, LOL, I'm at the yacht club now, my phone is on. But about an hour later, Nolan did die. Durnan's lawyer says around 10:30 or 11, Nolan went limp. The lawyer says that Durnan described it like she had a heart attack.
Female unconscious, not breathing at the Montauk Yacht Club. 32 Star Island Road.
Police say the 911 call came in around midnight, which New York Magazine says does leave an hour unaccounted for compared to Durnan's lawyer's timeline of events. Durnan's lawyer says that his client tried to save Nolan by giving her CPR. But in an odd twist, Durnan was allegedly naked as he was looking for help. The New York Post spoke to witnesses who say they saw Durnan throwing sunscreen at people's boats, trying to wake them up, yelling, do something. And you have to ask yourself, why would he be naked on a Monday night after having a business meeting with a 33-year-old woman? Durnan's lawyer told New York Magazine that his client had taken his clothes off because they were soaked in Nolan's vomit. He also says that his client doesn't know how long he did CPR for on Nolan, which is an explanation for any gap in time that people may have as they put the timeline together of what potentially happened on the boat. Now, there has been speculation about a white powdery substance that was reportedly found on Durnan's boat after police had cleared the scene. Durnan's lawyer told New York Magazine that was not an illegal substance, but it was dust that was left behind by police as they were looking for fingerprints on board the boat. Now, Durnan's lawyer also said that his client told detectives that Nolan had excused herself twice that night, and that suggests that maybe she had to go to the bathroom, or it could be a sign of someone doing drugs. Nolan's family's lawyer has pushed back on that, saying that she wasn't a regular drug user, and the New York Post said the same as well, that she just wasn't known for doing drugs, according to people they spoke to. So that gets us to the question about how did Martha Nolan die? Because you had an inconclusive result related to the autopsy that the Suffolk County Medical Examiner did. So then Martha Nolan's family requests their own independent autopsy of her body. And that reportedly found only trace amounts of cocaine in her system. The Daily Mail was first to report that. And the family says that the cocaine in her system, it could have been there days before her death. And also, again, they said that they don't believe that it was an amount that would lead to an overdose. Now, the autopsy also showed that she was young and healthy, and it reportedly had confirmed that there were no signs of foul play like strangulation or blunt force trauma. But then we just get this summons. And the new development we're talking about today that is addressed to Christopher Durnan, now raising questions about this case and what may have happened. So the document states that the family of Martha Nolan plans to file a $50 million wrongful death lawsuit. And the document accuses Durnan of a couple things, including assault. Specifically, it says, quote, the defendant intentionally and wrongfully assaulted the descendant and gross negligence and reckless wanton conduct by the defendant toward the descendant. Now, the New York Post is citing sources saying that the family's autopsy found some kind of assault caused her death, and it's unclear what that may be. And it is so important to point out that to this point, Christopher Durnan has not been charged with a crime. No one has been charged with a crime in connection to the death of Martha Nolan. Join us now to talk more about this is Will Corman, criminal defense attorney. Always great to have you here on Law and Crime. There's such a mystery here a year later about what happened to Martha Nolan. And then you have this summons that comes in. Like, what should we take away from this? Not necessarily from a legal perspective, but just trying to potentially piece together about what happened.
Sure. I mean, clearly somebody in her orbit feels that wrongdoing occurred. somebody feels as if this death wasn't accidental. And so consequently, they filed a suit. Now, again, they may have been filing the suit to see what they can learn, what they can discover. On the other hand, they may actually have some information that leads them to believe this is a viable wrongful death lawsuit.
Yeah, so like when I look at them accusing him of assault, first and foremost, and like to this point, there hasn't been, we know that the Suffolk County Medical Examiner doesn't seem that they found any evidence of like blunt force trauma or strangulation. What might, like, anybody can sue anybody, I guess, but like what would you need to be able to actually accuse someone of assault like this?
So again, I think we need to be very, very careful here because, as you said, we're not exactly sure what happened. There's an allegation out there that assault may have led to her death. It's not the primary cause of death, or it's not the primary charge in the lawsuit itself. So essentially what they're insinuating is that something happened on that boat. This wasn't an overdose. This was something a little more serious than that. And consequently, if I were her lawyers or the lawyers of the estate, I would want to know that there was something there I could base the lawsuit on. This wasn't purely conjecture. It's not a fishing expedition. There's something that they learned during the course of their own internal investigation that led them to believe that this lawsuit was appropriate.
Like from like a fishing expedition like standpoint, and like I have no, we don't know, like we just have these 3 pages here to this point. We don't know like the the independent autopsy, there's rumor about what it may or may not have found, but what would be the strategy, I guess, from the family side? Because like what happens now, like this has been put in, Christopher Durnan has like 20-30 days to respond to it. What's the type of information that could come out? Like what would be the strategy of filing something like this if you were looking for information?
Well, they could want to conduct depositions. They could want to find more information about what happened that night. Obviously, there are police reports. I don't know if the estate has access to those police reports. I don't know if they have access to the underlying autopsy report. I believe they've had their own independent autopsy, but I don't know if they had the ability to compare and contrast their own independent autopsy report with what the county examiners or the county coroner did. So that could be one line of attack. It could also be to find out who Durnan spoke to shortly thereafter, whether or not he made phone calls. We know he was screaming for help, but who did he call before he started screaming for help, if anybody? Did he make phone calls to associates? Did he make phone calls to friends? Did he make phone calls to people before he started yelling that something had happened on the boat? That's all information that would be important. They could subpoena phone records. They could subpoena phone logs. They could subpoena computer records in order to find out exactly what was happening here.
In some cases, whatever it may be, you'll have, a wrongful death lawsuit, and not saying this is a case that involves foul play, but, say in a typical murder case, you might have the criminal part of it that has to play out, and then you'll have a wrongful death lawsuit on the side. In this case, it's an open investigation. No one's been charged. So it's not like you're going to have a criminal trial at this point. Like, to have a wrongful death lawsuit be successful and end up the family's looking for $50 million, like, do you need to have that criminal case in something like this, especially if, the word assault is being thrown around in it?
No, there's no need that there be a criminal suit. I'm sorry, there's no need that there be a criminal case. Candidly, it would help. Someone else could do all this digging for you, but it's not required. And there are plenty of times where a criminal case doesn't develop. Again, remember, the standard of proof in a criminal case would be beyond a reasonable doubt. The standard of proof in a wrongful death lawsuit is significantly lower than that. So as a net result, there are plenty of times where there are wrongful death lawsuits where there are no criminal cases. And also keep in mind that the lawsuit itself casts a wide net. Yes, there's an allegation of assault, but there's also an allegation of negligence. In other words, they're saying that whoever was on the boat may have contributed to this young woman's death. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they caused it in and of themselves. So hypothetically, if she overdosed or if she was taking drugs and they didn't get her aid fast enough, one can imagine a scenario where, and again, we don't know this for a fact, but if everyone on the boat is doing drugs and she overdosed and they waited because they didn't want to call the police right away because there was other criminal conduct going on the boat, that's something that's negligent. And consequently, that's one of the causes of action in the lawsuit itself.
They're going for, or this says that they want $50 million. And, listen, you can't put a price on life, of course. But, at the same time, like I hear $50 million. She wasn't someone, it seems, who would have $50 million. Like, how do you quantify? I mean, he's someone who seems very successful. I don't know if he has $50 million in the bank. Like, how do you quantify something like that when putting what does that mean when someone says, this is a $50 million wrongful death lawsuit?
I mean, candidly, I don't think it means all that much. I think that certain jurisdictions require you to put a monetary number in there. Certain jurisdictions require you to put an amount on a form. Not every jurisdiction does. And so I think this is a number. And I don't want to sound glib. I don't want to say it was plucked out of thin air, as you correctly said. You can't put a number on a life. You can't put a value or something along those lines. But I don't think we should read anything into the fact that there's a number of $50 million being floated out there.
I'm sure for this family too. I mean, for an entire year, you're unclear about what happened to your loved one, right? And it's this mysterious circumstances of how she died, and we still don't know. It's an open investigation, and that's it. How does filing something like this potentially impact any sort of criminal investigation that's ongoing?
So, from a criminal defense standpoint, if this gentleman were to be charged criminally, I would be thrilled that there's a civil lawsuit that's ongoing. As a criminal defense attorney, if there's a civil lawsuit that happens prior to or during a criminal case, I love it. It enables me to make an argument for my client that there's some other reason as to why my client was charged with a crime. There's some other incentive. There's some other motivation. It gives me as a criminal defense attorney access to whatever goes on in that civil suit. Sometimes it's far beyond the reaches that I as a criminal attorney can have. So from a strategic standpoint, trust me when I tell you that if he's going to be charged, his lawyers are happy that there's a civil suit that's ongoing, in my opinion.
How does, I always wonder, because you'll have in this case, the Suffolk County Medical Examiner, it seems inconclusive that they've been able to come up with anything, and initially there weren't any signs of foul play, and it's unclear whether there is any foul play in this case. Like, how can two autopsies, how have you seen, differ from one another of, and we don't know what this independent one specifically found, but if there is any sign of assault or something like that?
So again, expert witnesses often have differing opinions all the time. So one coroner can review a body, can review footage, can review test results, and come up with a completely different answer than someone else. So it's not unusual. I mean, cases happen all the time where there's a battle of the experts, if you will, where one expert believes one set of findings and another expert believes another.
What's the strategy behind getting an independent autopsy? For a client in any sort of situation where, they want to have their own, I think the Nolan Wells case right now, very different case that we're talking about, but that's one where you saw an independent autopsy and the family kind of making efforts to go that way. How often do you see it? And then what's the strategy behind it?
So I don't think it happens all that often, but it does happen. Sometimes, again, there can be an absolute mistrust of a county. There could be a mistrust of law enforcement. And consequently, rather than simply relying upon the words or the findings of a potential adversary, you want to do your own investigation. For example, if these folks simply don't trust law enforcement, and they think that law enforcement may be in cahoots with the prosecutorial body, if they think that there's already questions raised as to how somebody died, and they don't trust the county itself to do the investigation, that's when you see an independent autopsy more often than not.
And then going forward, I mean, if you're the defense attorney for Christopher Durnan and, he said he hasn't done anything wrong, he makes it seem like, she just, ended up having some issue on the boat and I don't know what happened and I ran to get help. Obviously there's questions about how he ended up naked. They say she was covered or he was covered in vomit and, whatever happened there. How do you respond to something like this, when it comes across your desk that not only is it $50 million, but you see that word assault, you see negligence, that are some big words being thrown around in this case?
Well, I think that, first of all, if I were his attorney, I would want to make sure that I have protected my client before I respond to this lawsuit. In other words, I want to make sure that this criminal case isn't still ongoing. If the criminal case is still ongoing, then my client isn't going to participate in this lawsuit. Either I'm going to plead the fifth across the board, or more likely, I'm going to file what's called a stay of execution and indicate to the civil court that we can't do anything just yet because there is an ongoing criminal prosecution, and therefore we can't provide any answers until that wraps itself up or until we know that that's not happening.
So at some point, police in Suffolk County, because it is still an open investigation, they're still, that's how it's reportedly been listed. I mean, at some point, do they need to close this case or can it just be open forever?
It can be open forever. It can be open forever. And as I said before, Durnan's attorney will have the ability to some extent to say, hey, we don't want to do anything yet. We don't want to provide any answers because this criminal case is still open or this criminal case is ongoing. But at some point, the judge in the civil court is going to say, enough time has passed. We now need to move forward with this case. And that window could be very small or it could be large, depending on exactly the realities or the realistic probability of a criminal case coming.
And when something like this gets filed, and it's not even really, I guess, the official, lawsuit itself, but I mean, what's the timeline typically, especially in a case like this that's still open, no charges have been filed, of how long the civil proceedings could go on for?
All cases, whether they're criminal or civil, take a very long time. They just do. The discovery process on both sides of the coin takes an exceptionally long time to go through, between depositions, subpoenas, motions, so on and so forth. These cases take a very long time to resolve.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens next. Certainly a big development in this case, but still very much a mystery. Will Corman, criminal defense attorney. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and we are also streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.